Okay, nowadays.
Welcome to MYFest2024. Thank you for joining us today. We're so happy that you're with us. Today is the second session with Dr. Jon Ippolito. And today we're going to talk about how generative AI make new things. These are our community agreements. As you all know, that we organize MYFest with the ethos of intentionally equitable hospitality. That praxis entails that you are always welcome, regardless of any background, race, disability, or anything. And if you encounter any issue, let us know, and we'll be happy to support you throughout the session. Without wasting too much time, I'm going to hand to Dr. Jon to get started.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my slides in the chat just to help people who want to follow along from home. I will ask for your forgiveness. I have, it's been a little bit of a struggle to turn them into an accessible form, especially because this particular conversation today is going to focus on visual applications of AI. And the reason is that I think it elucidates certain things about creativity that are hard to demonstrate in the other sort of genres or mediums. So I will create an accessible version of these slides that I'll post in the Google folder within a few days. I'll try to describe what's on the screen, but please, if you do have questions, interrupt me at any time about what's on the screen or other questions that come up. And also those of you who notice that I'm talking through something that should be described orally, let me know, or feel free to jump in and describe it yourselves. Okie doke. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and talk about how generative AI makes new things. How is that even possible? And what does that imply about the implications for its possibilities, what it's good at, and its dangers, what it's bad at? So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, you should see the usual little robot people. There's an icon over in the upper left corner, and the title, How Can Generative AI Make New Things? This is session 2 of 3. The first one was yesterday on the dangers to democracy, and the third one was when should we trust AI? That's going to be tomorrow, same time, same channel. When should we trust AI? So let's dig in a little bit to the actual underpinnings of this technology and see if we can figure out what that tells us about when and how it's being used, and what we can expect of it in good or bad. So I'm going to talk through 4 different points: creativity through averaging, which is a weird idea that averages can be creative; learning about large language models through image generators, which I think is an underrepresented part of our field. We all talk about writing. It just seems to be the go-to, sort of medium. And I certainly teach writing, and I have worked at a writing center and so forth. So it's dear to my heart, but I don't think it's necessarily even the best way to understand what's going on under the hood. How image generators depend on word association, so that the kind of tight coupling between large language models and everything else we see, whether it's video or music, and in this case, I'll use images because it's easiest. And then how image generators create hybrid images, which I think is one of the hardest things to understand. How can we get these images that we've never seen before of a pope in a puffer coat and that sort of thing? So first, I'd like to start with a little exercise. It's called creativity through averaging. And as before, I am using large language models in this workshop as a way to demonstrate their potential and weaknesses. There are many reasonable reasons not to use them that have to do with harm, such as bias, disinformation potential, carbon footprint, exploitation of workers, and so forth. But I will be inviting you to use them in this workshop. You don't have to. So you can use your text generator of preference, from ChatGPT to Gemini to Claude, whatever you prefer. If you want, I'd like you to try this connect random things exercise. So here's, I don't know, some random person on the left. I just picked her face out of the blue. Maybe some of you recognize her. And then, of course, the Big Bang theory about the origins of the universe. What do these two things have in common? Probably nothing, but we can find out. So what I'd like you to do is try connecting two very random things. And I will, for those of you who don't have access to this directly. I'm just going to post this in the chat to make it easier for you. I want you to try this little exercise. Chat, boom. Okay, so this is connect random things exercise. So take a look at the link in the chat if you're so inspired. And what you'll see is something like what's on the screen right now, which is an exercise to illustrate the power and limits of AI fabrication. That is, how good is it at finding connections between things that really have no logical or necessary connection at all? And in your head, you can sort of rate the results from 1 star to 5 star. It would be interesting to see what people come up with. So you can come up with your own set of completely randomly disconnected things that have nothing to do with each other, or you can choose from my list. So you can say, what's the connection between narwhals and the Colosseum, or Elon Musk and the Sistine Chapel? Like, just go wild, don't pick things that are close, pick things that are as far apart that where it would be a stretch to imagine any possible connection between them. And then literally all you have to do is ask your chat, model, what is the connection between X and Y? Fill in the blank. So let's see, I'll use ChatGPT for mine, and I'm going to try, oh, I don't know, I'll pick something from the list here. What's the connection between a platypus and the Great Gatsby? You can do this on temporary or not. No one's going to be graded on this. And you don't have to give it a background. There are ways to craft very, careful prompts. We're going to just make it really easy. What is the connection between a platypus and the Great Gatsby? Platypus being a monotreme animal related to mammals, and the Great Gatsby being a book by F. Scott Fitzgerald about the 1920s. I'm getting, might not be immediately apparent. However, if we think creatively or symbolically, uniqueness and rarity, misfit in society. Wow, that's a good one. Platypus doesn't fit neatly in the typical categories of mammals or birds. Jay Gatsby is a misfit. Perception versus reality. Platypus was thought to be a hoax. Great Gatsby, appearances and reality are definitely at odds. Okay, so I'm going to say I think this is a pretty good job of connecting a platypus and the Great Gatsby. And I'm really curious to see what others came up with. Okay, Veronica's got Daft Punk and the Great Gatsby. Known for their elaborate and stylized presentations, as well as their exploration of themes related to excess, decadence, and the illusory nature of success and happiness. Wow, okay, that's not bad. Mistral, an open source large language model. Maha posted to Poe, gave an example from Poe. Let's look at that. Gravity and Kim Kardashian. Wow. I think it could go a lot of directions with that one. Cultural gravity, attraction, universal presence, and impact. Those are a little bit vague, but we'll take them. Apparently it was using ChatGPT. I'm never, yeah. So this is a GPT 4.0, which I think is what I use. No, I went back to 3.5. Okay, so she opposed leaning on a later version of ChatGPT than me. Heather, let's see. Oh wait, before Heather, we've got Bonnie. Maybe not random enough. Simone Biles and electric cars. Her role as ambassador for a brand associated with electric vehicles. Okay, I didn't even know that. So if that's true, I would look that up to fact check it.
It might not be true. We need to fact check that one. That's such a cool.
Yeah.
It turns out to be made up. That's like everything.
I asked it for a news article link, and it says there is. I couldn't find one, so I think it just made it up.
Yeah, but I mean, she probably should be, right? So that's interesting. So clearly in some of these cases, we sort of forgive the AI because we're saying, well, it's sort of brainstorming conceptual relationships that are really abstract. But in a case where it's actually claiming a connection, like this person's a brand ambassador, that's something that can be fact checked and can be wrong. So here, I think this exercise has already demonstrated the sort of advantages and disadvantages. I'll unshare my screen for a sec. Of this kind of strange version of creativity, right? Because we're able to see sort of very creative ideas like the platypus and Great Gatsby have some kind of misfit connection, but we're also able to generate things that are just not true because they happen to be sort of connections that are arbitrarily created between things. So I want to see through some of these other ones that are pretty funny. Heather's got capybaras and cancer immunotherapy. Researchers have discovered have evolved a unique immune system. Is that true? Ask for a citation. This is real? Are you kidding me? Heather, I'm assuming you did not know that when you asked for that connection. Damn. That is crazy.
Did not,
okay?
Not at all. I picked capybaras. It's my husband's favorite animal. And I just was like, I like vaccines. So let's see what happens.
I mean, it's my kid's favorite animal too, right? So that is absolutely absurd. Okay, orangutan and Super Bowl. Those almost sound like anagrams. Valerie's got, it's not direct. However, these terms might be used together in metaphorical humorous context, like an orangutan and a Super Bowl. Okay, that was pretty much a kind of, a disclaimer that sounds like a guardrail, like basically the AI is saying, hey, we don't really see much connection there. Sad, because I really wanted to know if there was like a football team somewhere called with the mascot of the orangutans or something. So I hope that gives you a sense of what we're talking about here, right? If you haven't tried this of course you can refine it more. You could say, write me a romantic comedy about, the Civil War or whatever. But these are extreme examples of trying to find connection. And those connections are hybrid in the sense they're looking for any data that they can find or interpolate between two existing sets of data, right? So in the case of the capybara immunotherapy, the shocking thing is that there actually is a factual result that is in the middle between those two things, essentially. And that's the case. We'll talk about this a little bit more tomorrow, but that's a case where averaging finds something that was in the data set between the two. And that presumably, if the data set isn't biased and reflects, scientific or sort of social understandings that are written in the internet, then that's helpful because we're finding something that we might not have thought of otherwise. In other cases, such as Simone Biles being the brand ambassador for an EV company, that's a case where there's sparse data in between those two, right? So there's the world of Olympic athletes and gymnasts, and then there's the world of sort of electric cars. And in between those two in the data, there isn't much to go on. There's not a lot of related information. And so as the metaphor of the overzealous intern goes, ChatGPT or whichever tool that was, is making that up. So the metaphor that I've been using for this 3-part series is that we're almost like working with a child. Not that the AI is a child, but that our relationship to AI is something like a relationship to a child. A child can be creative and inventive, and we might want to encourage that. But a child can also be like reckless and truculent, and a teenager, and we might have trouble dealing with that. So that idea that we need to know if it's important to encourage its creativity, we're also recognizing that there are boundaries that we somehow need to recognize. And again, I'll talk more about those boundaries next time. But today I want to really examine that type of creativity. And I think what we've seen is a great demonstration of where it succeeds and where it fails. So I'm going to go just right back to my screen again. Share screen. There we go. Okay, so you should see Taylor Swift and the Big Bang again. And I did that before as an example. You can imagine the sort of connections that come through there. So the second thing I want to do, besides just demonstrating that this averaging dynamic can be creative, is to sort of learn a little bit more by digging into image generators. And this is something I think everybody should do. I don't care whether you teach writing or coding or other genres for which generative AI is supposed to be disrupting the classroom. I think you should show and ask your students to use an image generator. Not an image generator like DALL-E or Claude, where just you write in some words and it gives you something, but the image generators that include more bells and whistles. The one I'll be showing you screenshots of today is Leonardo.ai. I think it's $150 no, sorry, 150 free credits. And, it's like 4 credits per generation per month for a free plan. So you can go right to leonardo.ai and play with it if you like. They do change their interface periodically. It changed a couple weeks ago, so the screenshots might look a little different unless you're on legacy mode. But I just want to talk you through some of the things that I think you can learn and your students can learn about large language models, ironically, from not focusing on language, but focusing on images. So first off, it's very rare in text generators that you get more than one answer. You usually have to prompt it and say, no, that's not quite what I want. Or you have to use things like GM Tech, for example, is an operator that lets you see the results of many different language models at once. But in almost, well, except for the sort of chatbot style image generators like DALL-E and Anthropic, you're always going to get more than one image back, right? So if I ask for, dog wearing a hat, I'm going to get all these. Now, there aren't necessarily a huge variety in these 4, and I'm definitely going to ask for more, dogs with a hat. I'm going to refine it and say, no, I want a Labrador or whatever. But you can see already the variety of things that it produces. And the large language models that give you text back, like a 5-paragraph essay or some explanation of Simone Biles and EVs, also have multiple different variations that at the ready to give you, and they pick one and they give you that one. Sometimes this is called, probabilistic nature of large language models, but is never shown directly. You always get this answer that's kind of like this oracle, like, God has spoken to you and there's one answer and he told you that answer. And I think that's a really misleading anthropomorphism of AIs. And when you use image generators, it breaks that by showing you a lot of different ones. So first, the fact that the output is already variable and gives you lots of examples is a good thing to learn, just that. Also, to demonstrate the probabilistic nature of AI, you can dig into the consoles. And this is not something you need to be a techie to do. It's literally just little panels on the sidebar. And you can go in and adjust these little bells and whistles. One of them, for example, is the guidance scale, how strongly you want your prompt to be weighted. And you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, one thing you can do is, for example, upload an image or choose an image that was already generated and say, well, I want a variation of this and I want it to be more, make it in the woods or make it darker or more cinematic or more anime, whatever. And you have a choice of how much guidance you want the original image to have and how much guidance you want the prompt itself to have, right? So there's a concept called temperature in large language models that's basically determines how random the result is going to be that it gets back. So in the case of text, there is a word just that's going to come out of the math that is the best answer, the most likely kind of autocomplete to any given sentence. So if I say something like, I don't know, she walked into my blank, maybe office or maybe, room is going to be the highest word, the most probable word that occurs in the correlations across the entire internet. So if your temperature was set to 0, meaning that there is no variability, you just get the most common, the most probable result, it's always going to say she walked into my office over and over. But if you raise that, you might get she walked into my car or she walked into my life. And if you raise it much higher, you might get things like she walked into my orangutan, which would be extremely unlikely, but that's what temperature does. By raising the temperature, you get more and more of these kind of unusual results. And this is a specific, slider that you can adjust in a lot of large language models. It may not be called temperature, but that's what it is. And that's completely absent from ChatGPT. It's got a temperature set in the back end, and you're stuck with that. Now, someone was using Mistral. So if you have an open source model that you can tweak the parameters of, you can change the temperature right there. And you'll see very different results if you raise the temperature than if you keep it low. But that's something that, again, the text-based generators hide from you. Dependent
John,
on, yes.
I've got a quick question on that, on your last one.
Please. Sure.
You were talking about advising us to use more sophisticated image models, and I haven't done that yet, so thanks for the suggestion. It seems like the ones I use, they always force you to have it as a square. And even in ones that I would think would be coming along enough to allow for different aspect ratios, is that something that you would anticipate we're going to see change pretty significantly, where that's just going to be a thing of the past, where some of the less sophisticated ones force you to have an aspect ratio of a square?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who is an artist working with these tools doesn't use Dolly regularly, or one of these kind of tools. So I just posted Leonardo AI, which is it's one of many. It uses an open source model under the hood called Stable Diffusion. They have their own model as well that they've recently released. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So here's Leonardo AI. This is actually the same tool that I drew those screenshots from, but they changed their layout. These companies are constantly like changing their interface. So it might look a little different, but if you go over here on the left, I don't know if you can see, it's a little clearer in the new mode actually. So if you look over here on the left, you can see lots of different aspect ratios and sizes. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I was noticing that. Yeah, yesterday.
Yeah. So this is just the fact that the other ones generate squares is just convenient for them. There's no reason it has to be square.
Yeah. And Yasser's got his hand up too.
Yeah, Yasser.
Coincidentally enough, when I was trying the exercise now with ChatGPT asking about connecting different random things, I picked from list A, Elon Musk, and list B, I think the Bill of Rights. And you see, Elon Musk is never concerned about rights. But after I gave it the prompt, it just got me, like I saw a pop-up that said ChatGPT is now able to learn from the memory of the discussion, and it will customize the responses based on your preferences. And there is this button that says clear ChatGPT memory or continue. So do you think that with this, I'm not a fan of images because I can't see them, but do you think that this sort of, and I disagree completely with the word memory because it's anthropomorphic enough that says memory, and memory is connected to the brain. But do you think that this will improve image generation, or this will sort of turn our own discussion into a new way, or maybe change our discussion about this?
Yeah, it's a great point. There's a lot of terms, as you know, Yasser, that are referred to in anthropomorphic ways by these AI tech companies. And memory, of course, is something they would like you to think that you have this intern who's going to remember your instructions from one day to the next. Now, it is true that there is a kind of memory going on in the computer science sense, but it's simply kind of adding, there's a lot of what we call prompt injection, which means that when someone is writing a, when you write a prompt, you often get just what's, you think that you're only giving it what you see on the screen, right? But in fact, the engine behind the scenes of these newer models, things like that come from these companies, are adding stuff onto the model. And sometimes it's detail, like you might just say, I want a scene of an archaeologist, and they're going to say, I want a scene of an archaeologist in a jungle with a Mayan ruin nearby, and they add all this stuff, and you say, oh, look, what a cool image. Well, you didn't say all the detail, it added detail for you. And this can get the companies in hot water sometimes when they add diversity prompts and you ask for the founding fathers and you get Black people and Native American people and Asian people. So they've been caught doing this in the past, but the idea of a persistent memory is essentially sort of storing some of the prompts and feedback that you've given in the past and kind of adding that surreptitiously to the newer prompts. I don't know if that makes sense, Yasser. Does that make any sense as to what they're doing there?
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
like this pop-up, I just stopped at this pop-up and this message, and I thought like memory, and there is this clear ChatGPT memory. And when I went into my memory, it had like some words that I used in a couple of sessions, and it had some even words that I used when it comes to accessibility, because sometimes I gave it some content to let me know when I need a specific page number, or when I need to correct a citation or something like this. So I just stopped at it, and I just thought about it for some time.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. I personally don't use it because I'm nervous about giving any of my personal information to these large language models, but it is a feature that they've touted as something that's helpful. And there is something called a system prompt, which you can add to, something like GPT-4, where you say, I'm a professor studying artificial intelligence and education and its implications for society, and I tend to write on a collegiate level to an undergrad audience and blah blah. You can give it sort of like this prompt that it always injects, and in that case you choose what that is, and it sort of carries over from one thing to another. So you don't have to keep explaining yourself. It'll always kind of give you, in theory, responses that correspond to that request. I just want to call out Bonnie, who's been giving alt text responses to the things that I'm describing on the page, and also has this really funny one with hamsters and what is it, Bonnie? Hamsters and infertility?
Yeah, that was a random connection that I knew only because having gone through infertility and some of the medications that they give you, it has hamster hormones in it to try to get your body to do certain things. And I just remember when we were experiencing that, joking with my husband saying, hamsters, I don't want to have a hamster, I want to have a baby. So yeah, that was one that I already could have anticipated what it would come up with, but the answers that it gave are as factually accurate as a non-medical professional researcher would know. But yeah, those are accurate as far as I know.
That's interesting. So you deliberately pick something for which a normal human would not expect there to be a correlation between those two things, and yet it
at least I never certainly did. But yeah, it was really fun to be able to anticipate what it might come up with, versus the surprises that we get with your examples. Yeah.
Well, Bonnie, I just want to thank you for the alt text in the chat. But I also, Yasser and others, please do jump in and describe what's on the scene. If I'm not saying, again, this is a visual heavy sort of talk. So I want to make sure we can make it accessible, even if I'm focusing on some things that are on the visual side. So that idea, again, these are not things that are just visual. They're more like, if you use an image generator, you are made aware of capabilities and limits that are not obvious from this Oracle-like chatbot interface that most people have to use for text generation. AI's dependence on model, you get completely different results depending on which model you choose. It looks like anime, it looks like illustration, it looks like cinema, it looks like a line drawing, and from exactly the same prompt. And that's something you just don't see typically in a text generator. You don't realize that, unless you use one of these things like GM Tech, you don't realize that Mistral and Llama and Gemini and ChatGPT and Claude are going to give you different results because they're different models. But as you can see from the variety here, and I'll just describe, there are people who look like, kind of porcelain dolls, or people look like 3D anime figures. There are people who look like aliens with weird bright colors, some things that look like sort of Pixar style 3D animations. And if I go over to Leonardo and pick a model, you can see that there's a huge variety of kind of visual results you're going to get based on the answers that you pick, or the model that you pick. That's something you, again, don't see at all when you're looking at a typical text generator. Okay, what else? AI fabrications are just so much easier, at least for sighted people to notice when there is a fabrication. Like, if you give me the hamster, kind of fertility thing, I would have been like, get out. Like, I wouldn't have any personal kind of experience to judge whether that was accurate research or not. I'd have to spend an hour Googling it. Whereas when you see someone with like 6 fingers, or you know pretty instantly that there's something wrong with that picture. And this is very important, I think, for students, because when you ask students to see, and I'm showing a picture of kids who are supposed to be high-fiving each other, but this girl has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.5 fingers. So I think this is really helpful for our students, because if you ask them to generate or to write an essay on the French Revolution, and it gets Robespierre confused with Richelieu, then they're not going to know necessarily that was a mistake. But if it shows a picture of Napoleon with 7 fingers, they know that that's wrong. So the attention, the way that these AI image generators call attention to AI fabrication, I think is very useful for people to see. Also, recognizing beauty stereotypes is a big thing. And so this is important to note. I'm not going to kind of give this away, but someone else describe what you see on the screen here with this image. How would you? These are prompts for typical female doctor and typical male construction worker. So can someone describe these people?
All I can think about is this song that they used to play in a Men's Warehouse commercial from my youth, where they sing, "What a difference a day makes." So these are gorgeous people. They're
gorgeous people. Yeah, exactly. They're just stunningly, the women are like glowing and radiant and look Nordic, maybe. The men are like rugged and handsome, and they all have like this mustache and kind of like a little bit harsher lighting, maybe, but that, it's definitely that sort of like, the most attractive sort of imagining you can do of a construction worker. And I didn't say making them attractive, I didn't say make them look really appealing visually. And so it said, Veronica says they look like they've been taken out of a Shondaland soapy kind of show, unrealistic beauty standards. Yeah. So 20 this generator hasn't heard that 2024 is the year of the hot rat men. Yeah, no Timothy Chalamet here. These are typically trained on earlier information. This has actually a technical problem with AI generators. It's not just that. Yes, it is also true that they're sort of biased toward when humans give feedback to these things, they're going to say, "Yo, this is good. This person looks really hot." It's also true that people tend to post more attractive pictures of themselves on Instagram, or when people, add artwork to, digital painting to DeviantArt, they're probably not going to put someone who's really ugly as often as they're going to try to make some beauty standard out there, right? So there's unrealistic beauty standards biased in the training data. But there's a more insidious problem here that has to do with averaging. It's called literally the midpoint hottie problem. And it's the idea that when you take a whole bunch of different faces and kind of munge them together and create a composite picture, the result will be more attractive than than you would expect. In other words, the average face, although that sounds very kind of tepid and maybe even homely, is actually a very attractive face. Now, there are different theories for why this is. Some people have proposed that it sort of averages out, blemishes and facial irregularities and so forth. But this is a known problem in statistics, and it's easy to show in your class if you are demonstrating, looking up a typical worker or a typical Japanese person or whatever you might do, plug into an image generator. Students are going to have to recognize, oh, wow, this person is more attractive than what you might imagine a randomly selected person from that group would be. And it can generate a whole conversation about beauty standards on the internet as a whole, not just having to do with AI. I heard someone sounded like they wanted to share something.
Okay, sure. Have fun. Bye-bye.
Shahinaz, I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, I thought maybe she was accidentally unmuted.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
I don't know. I don't know that to be a fact. Yeah, but yeah.
I'll watch the chat as well in case there are other questions about that. So the other thing that I think
also, John,
on the flip side,
could you say the name of that again? The hottie.
Yes,
what is it? The hottie problem. The hottie
midpoint hottie problem. You can look it up, but I'm typing it into the chat. Hottie meaning a hot person, an attractive person, and again, it is a known defect of statistical reasoning about people's faces. So on the other hand, we can also see how creative these tools can be, and students who would just see like a text and say like, okay, that looks like a good essay about French Revolution, won't necessarily be wowed as much as some of us who are writing constructors who go, wow, that's actually pretty well constructed sentences. But when they see this image that I'm showing on the screen right now of Pope Francis in a puffer coat, you know, wearing this sort of very high fashion kind of down coat that is white and with these beautiful gloves that match his outfit. Okay, I think he only has 3 fingers on one hand, but otherwise they were convincing enough when they were released online that people wondered if the coat was really a, you know, fashionista, and they certainly demonstrated the power of these tools to make things that are really creative, not just in a kind of far out way, but also in a convincing way. Obviously, you know, that has dangers for disinformation, like we talked about last time, but I do want to call out that these programs also make that clearer how good they are. Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the idea of visualizing this kind of averaging both languages and images, and the idea that this, again, generative AI is creating by averaging. And I'd like to dig now a little deeper into the technology behind that. So what you're seeing is a black and white collage using newspapers, a sort of abstract image by my dad, actually, who was an abstract expressionist. This is a piece from 1962. And here are 2 collages created by George LaGrady, a contemporary artist, using AI. And I didn't use Midjourney or DALL-E or one of these more current programs to do it. But you can see the similarities are pretty striking. And so there is this sense in which if you prompted it correctly, you could generate images that look like images that are already out there. So again, to me, and you know, I'm the artist's son, but I do recognize a kind of visual similarity between the collages that are created by hand by my father and these collages that were created that look similar from an artist using AI. So what is behind the magic here? How does this work, this kind of averaging? I chose images here of Harry Potter. There's this famous series of memes generated with AI where Balenciaga, which is a very Tony Spanish fashion brand that has a certain kind of outfit and model, runway model, they sort of combine it with different popular tropes. So in this case, the Harry Potter sort of cast is made out to be Balenciaga models wearing this sort of outfits and looking with the hair and the, you know, this sort of look of this high sort of fashion brand. So how is this possible? How can we get Harry Potter and Balenciaga together? So we're going to talk about how image generators depend on word associations. If you didn't have large language models, you couldn't have these image generators. It's kind of a surprise because they came out earlier, but that's true. And also we're going to talk about how the image generators can create hybrid images like this, which are not just a recreation of an image that's already out there. Okay, so so I'm going to show you a series of diagrams that are sort of a sort of spatialization of and a somewhat simplification of the process of training data. So you grab 5 billion websites from the internet, you stick them all in a mathematical space, all the words you pull out and you stick them in this sort of abstract mathematical space with billions of dimensions, and each word is kind of a point in that dimension, in that space. Then in the original data, if you pick 3 words at random, like pet, velociraptor, and dachshund, they're going to be more or less equidistant from each other, right? So I've just shown a diagram where they just kind of like are in a equilateral triangle. The words are just all the same distance from each other. And then the process of training basically looks at correlations. How often do these words exist together on websites? Well, pet and dachshund are going to appear a lot more often than pet and velociraptor, or dachshund and velociraptor. So the words pet and dachshund, as the training takes place, are going to converge to closer points in this abstract mathematical space. And the word velociraptor is going to kind of diverge from those and move to a different point in this mathematical space. And that's literally what happens when you train these texts. So there is a way of representing all of the correlations between these words. What is likely to be an autocomplete of the next word in your prompt by essentially just checking to see how often they appear together in websites. And that this kind of space is called an embedding, and it's where all the the sort of logic, if it's not really logic, but it's the sort of probabilities live for large language models. Now, there's also images online, right? There are pictures and there's alt text ideally that goes along with those, as we've seen. So here I have an image of a girl walking with a dachshund and another picture of a velociraptor. And initially they're sort of just like in the same space, kind of unmoored to anything, untethered to any words. But when you go through the internet, as most of you know, and you're literally demonstrating in this presentation, and you upload an image, you're often asked to give alternative text to go with it. So that could be a literal caption that you see on the website if you're cited, or it could be an alt text, the part of an HTML tag for the image that's read by a screen reader. And so, you might see a picture of a Star Wars, spaceship and the words "film still" from Star Wars. You are invited to do that when you upload an image. This is a screenshot from WordPress. And when you view images, you can see them either with a screen reader or by going into like DevTools and seeing the alt text of the tag. So that's where the connection comes between words like, oh, Star Wars, and pictures like, oh, here's a spaceship. I'm sorry. Dachshund is really tough to spell. You're right, Bonnie. But I am trying to describe these things orally as well. So the point is that you can actually start to connect images with correlations, because the image of a girl walking a dachshund is going to be associated with the word pet and dachshund, because that image has those tags, that the alt text that appear close to it on a web page. Velociraptor is going to be associated with the word velociraptor because that's more likely to appear as an alt tag on that web page, or text that's nearby in a caption and so forth. So now we can create this sort of connection where images can also be spaced out in this abstract space, so that a velociraptor and a girl walking on the beach are very separated from each other, right? So now images have a kind of semantic distance that's really dependent on the words that they're connected to. But that also allows us to do the same thing we did before with words. We can average two images and see the results. So here is girl with a pet velociraptor in between the image of the pet dachshund and the image of the velociraptor. And it does sort of look like a girl with a velociraptor, and it was created by asking an AI to kind of join those things. So again, we've got this process of averaging, leveraging what we knew about semantic difference from words, or distance, and using that to apply to images. So then, let's see. If generative AI creates by averaging, can we just average the relevant images in our data set to create new hybrids? So again, okay, we now figured out how the word associations relate to images. Here's the tricky part. How do we get the coat in the Pope in a puffer coat? How do we get the girl walking a velociraptor? How do we get these very strange hybrid creative images that we see online? Well, the answer is basically no. We might think that if we want to make an image of a daisy on Mars, we just sort of somehow average the picture of a daisy and Mars and get a daisy on Mars, which is, there is an image of a daisy on Mars that I created here using a Stable Diffusion. But the problem is that if you try to just average the pixels, you just get a sort of superposition of them. You get a vague picture of a daisy over a blurry picture of Mars. And that's not what we want. We want a convincing picture of both. AI cannot generate hybrid images just by averaging pixels. So what does it do? What does it do behind the scenes? Yasser has a question.
Not a question per se, but I'm thinking about this in relation to accessibility, because a lot of apps now are coming on top of the internet, doing the function of writing alternative text for images. And one of the main ones is an application, is a feature as a part of a company called Be My Eyes. And it's just, I'm thinking about this because whenever I give it an image, it just says an image of X and Y, necessitating that it might be a, and then it just gives an expectation. So I'm just thinking about the idea that you're saying, that the idea of connection between images and words, as the what it does in this alternative text generator, that just tells me an image of a man who is looking pale, suggesting that he is sad. How did you know that he is sad? How did you know that this suggests that he is sad? you know. So I'm thinking about this connection in relation to in relation to this idea. So how can we maybe I'm thinking, how can we prevent the idea that AI is suggesting new things?
So yeah, so that's an excellent question or issue to bring up. It is really the flip side of what I've been talking about in terms of associating, words with images in order to create images. What you're talking about is leveraging that same association to create text descriptions of images, and that's actually really helpful in theory because there's lots and lots of images on the web that don't have alt tags, right? There's lots of inaccessible content that this would provide automated descriptions for. But as you say, we can't be sure that they're actually right. For the same reasons that averaging text doesn't always give us a correct answer. Like Simone Biles is not a spokesperson for EVs as far as we know. The word associations that it's going to create for an image it has never seen before are going to be averaging the alt text of images that it sees as similar, and those in turn are dependent on word associations. So it's a really fascinating problem. I don't have a great answer for you, but Bonnie posted a link in the chat that looks quite interesting about Be My Eyes. So I'd love to continue that conversation sometime, Yasser, because it's quite related to what we're talking about. If it's okay, I'll run through my last little talk here and give you a little video even that might be helpful to explain what's going on, because it's taken me so long to figure out how these things work. So let me go back and share my screen again. So like I said, you can't just kind of average the pixels together. That's not good enough. So a better approach, and the one that diffusion uses, you've heard of diffusion models. That's what, DALL-E 2 and now Gemini and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion use. This turns out to be similar to the problem of removing noise from a photo. The reason is that the best denoising algorithms work by segmenting the image into shapes. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because it's kind of visual and I still want to leave some time for questions. But essentially, if you try to say, if when something has noise, an image has noise, it means a lot of tiny little pixels, right? And having little tiny pixels makes the photo look grainy and kind of not very good. So you can blur out those pixels pretty easily with things like Fourier transforms that are part of Photoshop. I'm sure you've seen, blur filter apply to various things in photo manipulation. But that doesn't do a good job because you don't get the kind of crispness that you'd want in a picture of, say, a daisy. Instead, if you can kind of choose similar regions, if you can pick out areas that have a common color, a common sort of shape that's contiguous. In this case, I've shown a region that is essentially the petals of a daisy, the white sort of little pieces of leaves that stick out from the actual flower. And if you can just blur that part, well, then it actually does make the image look a little more crisp, and it gets rid of the graininess without adding too much blur. And you can basically go on and do that by taking a noisy selection, blurring it, and then getting a clearer selection in the end that actually looks better than the original image. If you do that enough, I'm going to do it with the head of the daisy, and I'm going to do it with the stem of the daisy and the background. And then when you're done, you basically get an image that looks better than if you tried to blur everything. So segmentation and this kind of denoising can result in an improved image. Now, that has nothing to do with AI. It has nothing to do with creativity. It's more like just something that happens on our phones or when we use Photoshop. Well, how does this work with AI? Well, the strange thing about AI is that, or these denoising algorithms, is that finding noise means finding shapes. You have to do that in order to identify which parts of the image to blur. And a denoising algorithm can actually find shapes in just noise. So you start, when you create a new image with Midjourney or whatever, you're starting with just noise, random noise, and then you're asking it to take away the noise. That sounds very paradoxical, but because it's used to finding shapes, that's what it does when you give it an image of a daisy. It's going to try to find shapes in the noise. And when you say there's a flower, it's going to try to find shapes that look like a flower. So instead of averaging the original photos, what we can do is we can add noise to each photo. Remember, I'm trying to find the average of a picture of a daisy and a picture of Mars, so I can make a daisy on Mars. I can add noise to both images. I can then average the noisy results, those kind of pixelated versions, and then I can denoise them to find new shapes that weren't in the original. And when you get something like that, you take the daisy and you add more and more noise successively until it looks really fuzzy, and the same with Mars. And then you find the average between those two pixelated versions. So I'm averaging in the space of noise, not in the space of the actual representation of the image. And then when I denoise that, I get an image that doesn't look like the original, but it has the daisy and Mars together. It's kind of a strange sort of backwards way to use noise to actually generate a new image. Now, this is a hard thing to understand. And so I'm going to use a kind of metaphor that I'll call the transporter analogy. And I'm going to draw on this famous, rather infamous, actually, Star Trek episode about a transporter malfunction. I'll try to, if I can, I will try to, let's see, bring up. Is that not working? Hold on. Okay, I'm going to bring up an excerpt that I made from this show.
Mr. Neelix. Yeah.
So this is an episode of Star Trek Voyager called Tuvix, in which there is a transport accident that accidentally combines two characters together.
Do you think you could possibly behave a little less like yourself?
So there is a very logical Vulcan, African-American, I guess you'd say African Vulcan, dark-skinned Vulcan. And then there is a sort of an alien who's shorter with kind of mottled skin, and they're trying to transport them.
Something wrong, sir. I'm only getting one pattern to Dr. Neelix. I don't think it's either of them.
Identify yourself.
I'm Lieutenant Tuvok. And I'm Neelix.
Sir, according to the bioscanners, he's right. Somehow their patterns have merged.
My scans indicate that all biological matter was merged on a molecular level. The man you see before you is literally a fusion of two atoms.
So I showed that little excerpt because I think it's a pretty good metaphor for what's going on. You are taking two different images and adding them together in this strange way to create a new person, in this case. And it's not because you're just sort of like, sort of combining the two in some kind of direct combination. That would be some kind of horrible, sort of a person with four arms and four legs. Instead, they're, because of this sort of conceit of the transporter, they're being dissolved into little atoms, right? And then the atoms are being combined into one person. And then when those atoms are reversed back, when they sort of pull someone back from the transporter, in this case, they got this one person who is a hybrid between the two. Things do not work out well for Tuvix, this combined person in this episode. But I think it's a decent model for thinking about how AI can be creative in generating hybrid images that didn't exist before. Anyway, so that's how we get Harry Potter wearing Balenciaga. That's how we get the Pope wearing a puffer coat. That's how we get, a daisy on Mars. Think of it as moving over to the space of noise and then doing the combining there and then denoising to get your final image. So that's kind of a lot, but I hope that's given you a little bit of a sense of how these things work. And I'd love to hear other thoughts or questions about that. Audio formats, yeah, Yasser, it's great question. So there's two ways to do audio formats. One is to essentially generate notes, sort of like a score, and then for example, MIDI notation, and then you might combine different kinds of MIDI notation together to create a new MIDI operation. The other kind, I think the first example of this was called Refusion, actually took the audio waveform, and let's say take multiple waveforms, and then it treated each waveform as an image. because you can take an audio file and open it in something like Audacity or whatever, and then you can see this sort of shape where the frequency and instruments pitches generate this kind of visual result, a waveform. And you can treat that as an image, and you can, for example, combine two images and train on those images. And that's the way this alternative version of audio synthesis works. So some AI works with sort of like the law, sort of notation behind the music, and some AI actually converts music to images and then generates the same kind of image hybrids that we've seen here.
Have you tried something like 11 Labs, where you give it like a 30-second audio of your voice, and then it can just generate any number of minutes with your voice?
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it? I haven't
It
tried
is
it myself,
very
but
scary.
in yesterday's session, we talked about how, the potential for disinformation and fake, deep fakes using those technologies. But yeah, the premise is that essentially you're converting to a space where there is a kind of another view or another sort of representation of the sound, right? In audio, it's Fourier space. So there's a mathematical space. There's the space that we hear, right, where their sounds are kind of like amplitudes, increasing, decreasing frequency, and then there's the space of frequencies themselves, sometimes called Fourier space, which is equivalent to sort of the noise space, if you will, of what I've been showing you. And if you can represent your voice in this other space, then you can combine it with things like, okay, now I want you to read, the Declaration of Independence, and then it will sort of combine that voice text with your own vocal characteristics. I don't know the details of it, but it's pretty scary. Mia has an interesting analogy to Star Trek there. Zeros and ones. Yeah.
Sorry, John. I just was thinking about my imagination. And when I was a child, I used to sort of be somewhat like deep imagining the teleporting and thinking, how doesn't it rip bones and blood? And I kind of was really worried about that but now our imagination is all in zeros and ones. And that's what I was thinking about. It wasn't so much a question as much as a ponderance. So sorry about that.
Yeah, it's fun. I thought about that too. And I think David Niven, the science fiction author, wrote some really interesting things about what would happen if you actually did transport someone. The more likely scenario is not that I think the premise of the original Star Trek was the atoms somehow get beamed through space. That's why they say beam me up. But a much more feasible, even if it's still impossible by today's standards, model would be where you'd essentially analyze everyone's atoms at one place and then just convert that into zeros and ones, as you say, and send the information to a transporter somewhere else. And then you would effectively kind of reconstruct those atoms there. Because it's, there's all kinds of problems that could happen transporting atoms across, from the planet to a ship orbiting or something. But to represent that information, that's something that we could pass with, essentially a beam of ones and zeros. The problem David Niven points out is that in order for the transport to work, you'd have to be contractually obligated to kill the person that you scanned at the start, and to enable this kind of transportation of the person to the destination.
Whoa, that's heavy. And I think my childlike mind was just sort of worried. There was anxiety under that imagining, right? Of a like disembodied body. And I was thinking a bloody thing, the trauma.
Yeah.
And now you're saying it in such a different way and the contractual obligation of death. This is hardcore stuff we're talking about in a narrative sense, but it's interesting how this is becoming a sort of a kind of imaginative language that we're moving and progressing the world forward with. It's interesting to me. And there's a lot of my mind is just sort of right now exploding. Sorry. I'm gonna mute
Well,
now.
I'm deliberately, kind of trying to dig into these tools because I think if we look deeply into them, both on a technical level as well as a metaphoric level, we might not always like what we find, or it might give us different perspectives on these tools, right? So I do recommend watching that Star Trek episode if you can, because there's a big ethical dilemma about what to do about this new person who's created accidentally from the two previous people. They all have human lives, but is it somehow the fact that the two people who died was an accident? They figure out there's a way to kind of reverse it and bring those two people back, but then the new person who's created would have to be destroyed in the process. So there's a big ethical problem there. And I think the way that there are metaphorical associations with the way that artists feel today, that their work has been reused and essentially destroyed by these tools in order to allow other people to be creative. That's kind of an analogy. Greg Rukowski, for example, famous sort of fantasy art artist who paints dragons and knights and so forth. He was shocked to discover when Googling his own work that the images that showed up were not his. They were pictures people had generated with AI by using his name as a prompt. And it is very obvious that using artist names makes a much better result in many of these models than if you just try to use a prompt without connecting it to a particular style. So that brings up all kinds of artistic questions of influence and authenticity. But again, what are we destroying in order to get something that we might be creating? I'll mention one last thing and then I'll let you guys go. I was at a conference on Monday and someone has read this book, Entangled Life, about the sort of mycelial mushroom network under the ground, which is a really interesting idea. Some of you may know that trees communicate through their connections rhizomatically with essentially mushrooms. And so there's all kind of interesting studies about how they communicate with each other about pests and how they sort of feed nutrients back and forth. It's solitary tree is not really solitary. It has this whole network associated with it. This might seem to have nothing to do with AI, but in fact, this sort of network is very is very similar in some ways topographically to the way that a neural network works, because there's nothing in charge. That's all about kind of messages passed from one node in the network to another, the way that the large language models are trained in this way. And there is some evidence that there's a kind of intelligence in these natural networks, these natural organic systems. So someone, according to this person was telling me about this book, that a study had been done where they trained the network to assume that there were certain cities, and the network tried to establish routes between these nodes to see what were the most efficient connections. And what they resulted in was the same. They actually chose the cities from an actual geography of a certain nation that had these, kind of large towns, and it reproduced the highway system that connected all these cities. So that's a really interesting, is it an artificial intelligence? Is it an organic intelligence? There's clearly no, there's barely neurons going on here. These are organisms at the microscopic scale, but together they're creating this network that's intelligent, and in some ways is sort of mimicking what we see in our ones and zeros, sort of digital neural networks. So it occurred to me that we probably could be in this horrific situation where someone comes in and says, well, we're going to establish a data center here, and we're going to buy all these H100 chips from NVIDIA and build a really, a super computer that's going to be able to create a new AI model that will solve the world's problems and help us address climate change, whatever. And in so doing, they might just wipe out this forest under which is already a neural network capable of the same kind of reasoning, but we don't recognize it because it's underground and it's organic. And that's kind of a horrific thought to me. So I think expanding our minds about how these things work and thinking about natural intelligence as well as the kind we build in labs is important for our future. And on that note, I'll let you guys go. Yasa has a link to feedback from the from the session. Would love to hear more about your thoughts or where this could go. Oh, and Bonnie went ahead and asked about the connection between mycelial network and neural networks. That was sharp. What tool did you use, Bonnie?
I use ChatGPT for that.
Okay.
It's fascinating. It doesn't let me paste it all at once, so I'm trying to get it all in there for the notes. Yeah, so fun.
So it does say it's a network of HIFI. I didn't know that term. This structure has inspired algorithms in AI, particularly those related to neural networks. I don't know how direct that inspiration is. That would be interesting to kind of fact check. Pattern recognition, yeah, sure. Biocomputing, there is some research into that. Ecological data and AI, environmental monitoring. Yeah, so that's fun. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it's fun.
Veronica, thank you for joining. And Bonnie, you really were my co-presenter here. Thank you for doing so much work in the chat to kind of make it as accessible as possible for a visual heavy introduction.
It's very fun for me because it settles my mind. Mia was talking about her mind going a million miles a minute in different directions, and when I take notes, it helps me just at least like bring it home. So it was very helpful for me to be able to understand what you were saying.
Oh, I'm glad. Well, it's a lot to think about. Like it's hard to figure out how these very intricate mathematical models work. So I appreciate you all following me on that journey.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you,
Okay.
John. And it was an insightful one to think about the connection between words and images and visuals, especially for someone like me who is not really a fan of visuals, because I can't see them, so I can't really associate much with them. So that was really so good to be in the session. So thank you. I'm gonna actually stop the recording.
I'm going to think more about the problem that you mentioned in your example of alt text generation.
Yes, it's an issue that is really in my mind for some time right now, because I'm thinking about how, like, I'm not feeling quite in agreement with the idea to just, if I want to post something on my social media with a photo, but I have a commitment towards the disability community that I have to put it with alternative text. But I can't go along with the idea of having to feed this image to an AI and then get the old text and post it on social media, because I wouldn't feel quite safe to have the alternative text that is an AI generated alternative text to people, posted to people, because I don't know whether this is correct or not. I actually don't know. I can't see it. So I can't verify the fact that the alternative text is correct or not. So it's something that I thought about for some time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Veronica gave you 100% emoji on that. It's also a problem for digital curation, another hat that I wear, because traditionally you'd have librarians and archivists add metadata to files so that people could find them later. It's a lot easier to ask AI to suggest tags, keywords, that sort of add to files. So that could end up generating a lot of, make their lives a lot easier and their jobs more efficient, but also generating, as you say, things that are not trustworthy. In tomorrow's session, I'll talk about some ways to think about how, when we should use AI and when we shouldn't, when can be trusted, how does the creativity that we've seen today influence whether and what contexts we should consider using it.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.